5 Live Formula One.
Hello and welcome to a Checkered Flag special. We are in the paddock at the Albert Park circuit here in Melbourne, Australia, ahead of the first round of the 2025 season. And it suddenly occurred to us we have got some really exciting British prospects on the grid this year. So we thought we'd have a bit of a debate. I'm Rosanna Tennant and I'm joined by the BBC's F1 correspondent Andrew Benson, the lead commentator of the team, Harry Benjamin, and former McLaren mechanic Mark Priestley, because we have got Sir Lewis Hamilton in the Ferrari, George Russell in the Mercedes, and Lando Norris in the McLaren. 3 British drivers in 3 of the top teams. And you might be shouting, saying, no, what about Ollie Behrman in the Haas, the rookie driver? Well, I don't think he's realistically got a shot at the world title this year. Maybe his time will come. And you might be shouting, what about Alex Albon in the Williams? Well, also, he races under the Thai flag. So we're going to discount Ollie Behrman and Alex Albon just for the moment. We're going to focus on Hamilton, Russell and Norris. And the 3 gentlemen alongside me are going to give me their thoughts, and we're going to analyse the way they go racing, the way they approach racing. And I've got to come to you, Harry Benjamin, first. You get to commentate on all 3 of these drivers. If you had to sum up one of them, choose whichever one you want to go for first, how would you sell someone, one of these illustrious drivers on the grid in 2025?
Well, I think the obvious one is to start with Lewis Hamilton, and you would say, obviously, he's had his peaks and troughs over the last couple of years, but overall, the man is relentless. He never backs down. And if you find Lewis Hamilton behind you in your mirrors, you can be sure that you've got a hard time ahead of you. And he is a great example of somebody who had raw ability from the off, but has had to refine it over the years. He wasn't polished and ready to roll straight out the back, not only from his on-track action, but off-track as well. And I think that's actually what makes him such a good driver now, is not only on-track is he relentless and fearless, but off-track he's rounded and he is an ambassador for the sport. And that's what stands him out as not only one of the best British drivers, but one of the best drivers.
He's been so impressive, as Harry said, peaks and troughs of late, but a 7-time world champion, a knight of the realm, and he has been instrumental in pushing this sport to do more, both on and off track, changing the sport for good. Would you agree, Andrew?
Absolutely, yes. Through the COVID pandemic, when he, started to, for the first time, to raise the issue of diversity and racial equality in Formula One, which he's carried forward since then. But I think, just to pause for a second, Rosanna, I think one thing that we should bear in mind is that the British public in general, the worldwide public, is really lucky at the moment to have not just these 3 drivers, but there's an exceptional crop of talent at the very top of Formula One at the moment that would compare very well with any era of the sport at all. We're talking about these 3, Hamilton, Norris and Russell, also Charles Leclerc, the other Ferrari driver, Max Verstappen, of course, the 4-time champion for Red Bull. They are all absolutely outstanding talents. And Hamilton, Russell and Norris, obviously Hamilton, it goes without saying, but Russell and Norris all in that category of world-class, all-time Formula One drivers. And Russell and Norris haven't quite carved themselves out as greats yet, but they're well on the path to doing so.
So we're lucky to have these British talents racing amongst the world's exceptional talents, as it were. Mark, you've worked so closely with Lewis Hamilton when you were back at McLaren. What was it for you that stood out right from the get-go?
There were a few things, actually. I mean, obviously, with hindsight now, his results have been astronomical, unprecedented levels of success. But if I think back, way before any of that happened, I can recall moments like even before he became a Formula One driver, when he was racing in GP2, the next category down, now F2. I remember one evening when I was working in the McLaren garage and he came in and started asking me questions about our Formula One car, but the level of detail he was going to him, wanting to understand how the car works, how the technology works, and not just, when you press this button on the steering wheel, what does it do at the other end of the car? He wanted to know exactly what happened in between pressing that button and the eventual change that happened somewhere else on the vehicle. So he was always going to greater lengths than anyone I can ever remember, even my own Formula One drivers at the time. And maybe now, with hindsight, as I say, that might be one of the reasons that he's gone to have so much success.
I also think that it's worth bringing up 2007 there, because he exploded onto this sport, Lewis Hamilton. He didn't arrive as the finished article off track, that's absolutely right, but he pretty much did on track. He was on the podium for his first 9 races, and he really should have won the World Championship in his first year. And let's not forget who his teammate was, Fernando Alonso. This is not just any driver, this is another all-time great. They went toe-to-toe in Hamilton's first season and basically beat the living daylights out of each other and their own team. And it's absolutely extraordinary what Hamilton achieved in that first season. It's almost, even now it stands as one of his greatest seasons. And to say that about someone in their debut year, hardly made any mistakes until that critical one in the pit lane in China with a race to go, which ended up costing him the championship. Just remarkable, and it says so much about Lewis Hamilton that he could be so good so early. And it's really important to remember that now as we're in his 18th, 19th season in Formula One, and he's kept up that consistency of performance ever since. A couple of hiccups along the way in the last 2 or 3 years, which I guess has led to a few small question marks, you have to say, because he's been so outstanding and so dominant through his era. It's basically been his era, even though for a long time Sebastian Vettel had more championships than him, and even though Fernando Alonso also stands up there on the pedestal.
So let's bring in then George Russell and Lando Norris into this sort of stage of their career. If we wind the clock back, we don't have to go quite as far for Russell and Norris, but how did they impress everybody to get to where they are now? Because the talent's been there, obviously, but perhaps not the cars. If I'm thinking of George Russell, for example, so successful in the junior categories, and then perhaps the opportunity in F1 wasn't what he was expecting straight away.
Well, with both of them, the basic ingredient is just raw, naked talent. And you saw that with George Russell at Williams. This is a man who put the Williams, which was pretty much the slowest car on the grid, on the front row in Spa in the wet. It was like an all-time great Formula One qualifying performance. Lando Norris, before he'd even got into Formula One, he raced in the same car with Fernando Alonso at the Daytona 24 Hours, was quicker than him, just only by a bit, but was quicker than him. And then you could see when he was being prepared for Formula One by McLaren, doing practice sessions, Zach Brown, the McLaren CEO, told me a funny story a little while ago about Norris's first practice session when he was in the car opposite Alonso. Alonso had set his time, and Norris was then going for his time, and Alonso had finished his run, and they'd warned Alonso that Norris was on his lap and not to get in his way. First sector, Norris is as quick as Alonso. Second sector, he's slightly quicker than Alonso. Third sector, Norris comes on the radio, Fernando's blocked me. And they're all laughing on the pit wall. But Zach said, moments like that made you think this guy's mega, and that's the point, he is mega.
And that's why the teams get behind these young guns so early on. And we've had that with Lando Norris and McLaren. Mercedes, we've had that infamous PowerPoint presentation with George Russell telling Toto Wolff why he was the guy that they should back. And it's so obvious that that's why the teams really want to put their money where their mouths are, isn't it, with them?
Absolutely. Well, George Russell was one of those examples that very nearly didn't happen. You know, at the end of his GP3 campaign, he was almost down and out. He'd not out of performance, but he'd run out of money, and he wasn't part of the academy at that point. But Toto Wolff and Mercedes saw something, George Russell doing the writing of the email and creating the PowerPoint and proving that he was somebody worth investing in. And that is what you need. You need that drive off the track to put yourself forward. And then Toto Wolff backs in. I think before even including the qualifying in Spa, outperforming that Williams was one thing, but I think there were always question marks though because of his teammates. They weren't exactly the strongest. Like, he was up against Robert Kubica, and Robert Kubica was a brilliant driver, but not at that stage after his accident. So how much could we really glean from that? And then, you know, with the likes of Nicholas Latifi, he completely had the edge over him. So how can you get a proper gauge on someone like that? But clearly we don't get to see all of the data behind the scenes, and he was always placed there as a holding pattern before getting the big job at Mercedes. And when he came in, that Bahrain outing for replacing Lewis Hamilton when Lewis got COVID, and straight away he was on it in the battle for the win, in the heat of the moment, all the cameras on him. It didn't happen, but it very nearly could have done, and it wasn't his fault that it didn't happen. He showed amazing racecraft. He absolutely took it to teammate Valtteri Bottas, which was a bit of a, hi mate, I'm here for your seat, thank you very much. He wasn't intimidated by going up somebody more experienced than him. Ultimately, he was let down by team strategy in the end with the whole tyre pit fiasco, and that crushed him. You could see him afterwards. He was absolutely gutted. The scenes of him just sat there,
lying on his back,
hands.
wasn't he? Head in his hands.
But that, I think, has made him a massive contender going forward as somebody who is one of the best and proving that now over the last couple of years against Lewis Hamilton. He hasn't absolutely wiped the floor with him, but he's shown that he can beat Lewis Hamilton and beat him consistently.
Sometimes you just know, it doesn't matter who the teammate is, even if you've got a rubbish teammate, as Russell had for most of his time at Williams, sometimes you just know, you can just see the evidence in the way the car's body language looks on track, just the performances that the drivers pull out of it. It happened with Alonso, for example, in his first year at Minardi. Rubbish teammate, but anyone who watched that car knew this was someone special in it. It happened with Charles Leclerc, Hamilton's teammate now. When he came in at Sauber, Marcus Ericsson's his teammate, decent enough driver, absolutely wiped the floor with him. You just knew Leclerc was something special. And it happened with Russell at Williams as well against Latifi. And he got into that Mercedes and he went toe-to-toe with Lewis Hamilton for 2 seasons and then basically flat beat him, particularly in qualifying. That's so impressive last year. So I think there's been a bit of a narrative that's developed that's a bit unfair about Russell making mistakes, too many mistakes. He's made the odd one. Maybe Canada slipped through his fingers last year, but I think it's slightly unfair. He's been trying to prove himself. He's definitely done that now, and he definitely stands up there as one of the greats in Formula One.
Is that what makes a great driver, though? Is those mistakes? You know, you look at George Russell most recently in Singapore, right? Having the off right at the end, chasing down for the win and smashing into the wall. Lando Norris in Sochi, making the wrong call and losing out on what could have been his first race victory. Lewis Hamilton coming in too hot into the pit lane in China and finding himself in the pit lane in the gravel. Did that lose him the championship? It was one of the factors. Ultimately, all of these guys have had those mistakes.
Yeah, I mean, you do. When you're young and starting out your career, that's exactly what happens. And the difference with these 3 drivers is really that, isn't it? One of them has a wealth of experience. We rarely ever see Lewis Hamilton make mistakes. Yeah, George Russell's made them. Yes, Lando Norris has made them. But they're learning. They're early in their careers relative to Lewis Hamilton. I would argue that if there was ever a weakness of Lewis Hamilton, maybe we saw it towards the end of his Mercedes career, and it might be a mental weakness. It might be one where when things are not going his way, he becomes his own worst enemy a little bit and sort of talks himself out of the success that we know he can achieve. So that might be one thing for Lewis to watch in a Ferrari. How does he go against a new teammate? How's he going to be judged? And if the results don't go his way, in his own mind somewhere, even subconsciously, will that just start to confirm those doubts he was having at the end of last year?
So we've discussed the sort of natural talent, how the 3 drivers were discovered, perhaps their approach to the sport. Harry, you said earlier, if you're a driver and you see in your mirrors Lewis Hamilton coming out behind you, you know you're going to have a problem. When you think of those 3 drivers out on track, their racecraft, what comes to mind? We talk about Fernando Alonso going round the outside. It's those kind of amazing moves at the start. With these 3 drivers, what comes to mind? What sparkles for you?
Well, I think with Hamilton, it's just out and out relentless talent on the track and diving for that inside. For somebody like Lando Norris, that's a hard one, because I think we're seeing him develop quite a lot of his racecraft in the last year or so. We saw being pushed to the extremes against Max Verstappen last year, and I think he took quite a lot of learnings into that, and to be a little bit more patient and precise with his manoeuvres. And for George Russell, I think it's again a level-headedness to his driving, and that's how I would go for Russell.
I would say that the work ethic of Lewis Hamilton stands out for me as being astronomically good, above and beyond most of the other drivers that I've ever worked with. And that really stood out way back, even as early as 2007 and 2008. And I know that it still goes on today. He's in his 40s, he's got 7 world championships. He's often still the last guy here on a Friday night looking through data with his engineers.
It's funny, he was asked what stood out to him when it comes to Charles Leclerc as a new teammate, and he said, he joked at the hair and the eyes, and he said, no, actually talking seriously, it's the work ethic. And then Charles Leclerc was asked the same question about Lewis Hamilton, and he said work ethic. So it's a match made in heaven if they can get it right at Ferrari. But you're right, that is the Lewis Hamilton star quality. He is here. You go get those photos, don't you, with the sunset, everyone's gone, one light on in the motorhome, and it's Lewis Hamilton.
I know that Leclerc has been impressed by how much work Hamilton's been putting in this winter. At one point, Hamilton, he'd done a week of work at the Ferrari factory Friday he flew off to somewhere in Scandinavia to do a fitness weekend, and then he was back in the factory on a Monday morning. And apparently Leclerc said, "You just don't stop, do you?" And
he really doesn't, though.
No,
and I don't think he wants to or likes to stop. Not in terms of wanting to stop racing, but just in terms of always being on the go. I think movement is his medicine, quite like literally the physical sort of exercise element, but also being on the go.
It is a telling thing. Obviously, he's been in the sport for so long, so we've seen his character develop massively as well. And I wonder if sometimes we forget that when we're critiquing and analysing, Lando Norris's reaction to everyone seeing if he can battle for the title or not, getting a bit prickly. When you think back to some of Lewis Hamilton's escapades over the years, there's one that just came to mind talking about data. And I think, was it 2011 in Spa, where he took a photo of Jenson Buttons and his data.
Except it wasn't.
Well, so what's the story? But before he comes to that, but either way, he put it on Twitter, I think it was. That was still going strong then.
Oops.
But, what a massive, to everybody on the outside at the time, a massive leak of data to kind of prove that what was going on in that particular race. Hamilton wasn't happy with the way the order was and his competitiveness compared to Jenson. So how much he's come from that Lewis Hamilton to what we see now, I think that elevates his greatness whatsoever, and perhaps it's something we should remember when we look at the younger Brits coming up.
Exactly, it's a good point. He's grown so much, Hamilton, and I think that's what we've got to bear in mind about Norris, for example. He's only 25. He's been in Formula 1 for 7 years. And he's had to do his growing up in public, rather like Max Verstappen has, actually. And perhaps Norris didn't come in as the full package, but then who does? But I think what's been interesting about him so far is that, and someone who works close to him said this to me a while ago, every time he's had a kind of setback or a difficulty, he's learned from it and gone to another level. And they've never seen a point where he's gone backwards from that level. Now, we may yet, but until now, that's been the point, and that's what he's got to prove this year in 25 as he goes into what looks like being a potential title campaign from the very beginning. Has he learned those lessons that we were talking about a few minutes ago and applied them to such that he can take on Max Verstappen, which is really, this is no easy task. This is one of the toughest races there's ever been in Formula 1 history, possibly even the toughest in terms of the extremes he'll go to prevent himself being overtaken when it matters. Has he learned those lessons and moved on from them, which he did towards the end of last year? And I think that was one of the most impressive facts about Norris last year. If you think about what the trajectory that he went on from Austria when him and Verstappen crashed together, Austin, when they had the incident Norris got penalised for, somewhat controversially, to the next race in Mexico the following weekend, where he basically suckered Verstappen into a move that ended up with Verstappen getting penalised, and then Verstappen's red mist came down and there was another move pretty much straight after that got him another penalty. Think of the growth that happened just over that short period. So I don't think we've seen the best of Lando Norris even yet, and look how quick he is already.
Yeah, absolutely. He is such a quick learner. They all are. And just going back to the Lewis Hamilton conversation on that growth, I remember I hosted the Mercedes car launch back in 2017, and he admitted to me that he's been a late bloomer. Of course, he started in the sport in 2022 in F1. When he was 22, and now he's 40. You feel that's been so much growth. How much more will Russell and Norris grow? And actually, it's so exciting to think what they'll be like if they're here, when they're 40.
Well, I think I'll just raise a question here, because when the producer raised this idea with us, it was like argue the merits of these three British drivers, and I thought when he said that, I thought to myself, well, if you were to say who's the best British driver in Formula 1 right now, not in terms of overall career achievements, obviously there's an easy answer to that one, it's Hamilton, but right now, who's the best British driver? I don't know how you call that. It's really, really hard.
I don't think you can.
You can't.
Because the nature of this sport is you are only as good as the equipment you have. At the end of the day, the only way we'll know is if we stick them all in the same Formula 1 car and send them around 58 laps of Albert Park. Then you will get a truly definitive answer.
But the point I'm really making is we're talking about Lewis Hamilton and the other two guys, and we can't split them. What does that say? What that says about the quality and level of Norris and Russell, well, it speaks for itself.
Yes, alongside a 7-time world champion, and that's mad, isn't it? Well, I tell you what, it's been a fascinating debate. I don't know, as you say, we can't really pin 1, 2 or 3 on either of them or any of them.
We're all sitting on the fence then.
Yeah, I think there's room for all of us on there. But Andrew, to kind of follow up on your point, it does mean that we are set for an incredible season, because it's not just the British drivers that are going to go well this year. There are going to be battles between so many different nationalities, so many different teams, hopefully different appearances on the podium, different winners. Harry's got something to add.
I think also just to caveat all of this, I think we got to remember how we've got such an amazing crop of British talent. That is absolutely correct. But also I think we're quite lucky, or the UK is, because that is the hub. It's the home of motorsport. You hear about all these stories, Oscar Piastri. We're hearing obviously his story this week in particular, building up to the start of the season, and how he moved over to the UK at such a young age. You hear it from time to time again. Yuki Tsunoda, all the way from Japan, coming over to the UK. The UK is the place you learn and develop your craft. It's the place for the best opportunities. So I think we have to sort of say all this, but remember actually how lucky we are to have the infrastructure and why it is the hub for the majority of the Formula One teams in this championship.
Agreed. It's actually one of our country's greatest exports, I think, isn't it? Motorsport in general, but Formula One being the pinnacle of that. And it's something we should celebrate more, I think. The engineering talent, as well as the driving talent, is brilliant in this country. So we should be very proud of it.
If only we could bottle it and sell it,
Exactly,
Mark.
yeah.
Well, it's been a pleasure debating our British drivers, the best of British, battling it out on track here in Australia this weekend ahead of a mammoth F1 season. Thank you, Andrew, Harry and Mark. This has been an IMG production for BBC Radio 5 Live. Enjoy the 2025 Formula One season.